There are a number of ways to change up the drum samples within a mixed drum loop, and using especially the MXXX crossover system and MDrumReplacer, two very significant components. So what I'm doing here is just for experimental purposes, and it's not for quality of content. It's just more to see a trial of the concept. And it's pretty interesting. I just don't know a way to make it automatically function so that it can make it easier for everyone else. But anyways, so what I do here is I have crossovers, and in this case I use too many, and really you're only going to need like 4 or 3 generally. So you have your kick, you have your snare, you have your hi-hat, and then sometimes you have this percussive chatter. So that's where I went a little too far here, but of course you may be able to get away with doing certain things using more than 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever. So the key concept here is basically isolating the elements so as much as possible, so that when the detector of the MDrumReplacer kicks in, you can fine-tune that using the threshold system. So here's the original drum loop. So it's a pretty interesting drum loop, and it sounds pretty cool, and I just wanted to make a replacement of it. So that's what I did here. So really what's going on there is everything has been replaced. And while it doesn't sound that great, I just wanted to give a proof of concept, that's all. So I was able to isolate the kick using the detection system, and what I'm using here are the crossovers that are just analog. And what happens there is you automatically are filtering, so that helps with fine-tuning the detection. And there was only one instance where I actually found using pre-filtering was kind of handy. And basically I wanted to use it to subtract. And to subtract the sound, you basically choose learn and then go over the sound that you want to subtract, learn sub I mean, and then from there it'll show you kind of what you need to reduce, and it will automatically engage it. So that's one way to work with that. And I tried a few experiments because basically in some contexts of using electronic samples, it's going to be difficult to separate the kick and the snare and the hi-hat because of they use so many samples in those loops that there's so much overlap of these concepts and frequencies. So there's like a zipper noise in the kick, and the zipper noise is so high frequency and so audible that even when you're way up here on the crossover in the 10,000 or above range, you can still hear faintly the kicks and the snares, just because there's just so much processing going on in modern instruments. But as you see here, I was able to finagle quite a bit of things. Now, this is to get an idea of how you can do this. So I have a MDrumReplacer on all of the critical parts of the mix where I thought I'd be able to isolate. So I have the little bell sound that I isolated. And in reality, that sounds like this. So you have that weird popping bell sound. So anyway, we'll go back here. So I was able to get the hi-hats. There's nothing going on here, so this is muted. And then I was able to get the weird bell sound. And then I was able to get, of course, the snare. And what happens with this is if you change the dry wet, everything else bleeds back in. So watch this. Now, it doesn't affect this detection system in this case because I've already sort of isolated everything and I have everything set just how I want it. But that's just one way to kind of double check what you're doing. And also you could have a little bit of a bleed as well, because the bleed from up here is going to be different than the bleed from down here, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not going to be too much problems with that. And anyways, I wanted to give an example of how you can do that. Now, the other thing I did was I used first of all, I equalized the level a tiny bit, but then I also used a spectral-based crossover, which is just two parts. It's I think it was actually transient, I'm sorry, transient-based processor. So that's this thing right here, tonal transient. So in doing that, that opens up some interesting ideas, because you can make the drum loop sort of even conform even more. So once you're in this window, you only have access to certain parameters. So for instance, if I go back here, now I have to disengage solo. And so then what I can do is change these parameters here, which is going to affect what's happening with the transient response. But it's so many different ways of articulating the sound. It's just crazy how deep it goes. Like, check out what I can do here. So it sounds a lot tighter. Again, tighter. And that's just crazy, whatever that is. This section here is a processor unto itself. Now I hear that chatter. Let's say I found something I wanted. Well, I can just now go over here and reduce that. And also, to make that ringy bell sound a little bit similar to the other one, I just modulated the pitch. So all I'm trying to illustrate here is how using these multi-band crossover along with MDrumReplacer in the important bands, I was able to completely replace all the significant parts of the drum loop.